He cut the engine on the ridge and the crying didn't stop. Not wind, not birds. A sound with edges, a lion cub, calling for a mother who wasn't answering. He was already moving before the dust settled, sling bag on his shoulder, one hand on the bottles so they wouldn't knock together and make a new kind of fear. The bowl of grass below held the scene like a held breath. A lioness lay on her side in the open. No blood, no struggle now. Just that unmistakable stillness the wild uses when a story has finished. 30 paces away, a tawny cub rocked on unsteady legs, his mouth open on a thin, breaking wail that made the air feel smaller. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He went low and slow, knees bent, hands empty, gaze soft. Everything about his body saying, "I am not here to take." He stopped at 40 paces, knelt to shrink his shape, and matched a steady breath the cub could hear. In, out, in, out. It wasn't words. It was a metronome for a flooded heart. The cub turned toward him, cry changing pitch, accusing, then uncertain, then simply tired. He looked past the man at the lioness and called again, as if sound could rewind the day. The man felt heat press behind his own eyes. He opened his bag without hurry, screwed a soft nipple onto a bottle by touch, and slid it onto the grass between them. A second bottle followed, water with oral salts measured by old habit. He kept his palms open where the cub could see them. No grabbing, no rush. Flies stitched at the air, but vultures held their distance, circling lazy in a sky that did not care. The wind came steady from the east. He scanned thorn and shade for shapes that meant family. Nothing but heat shimmer and a grief voice echoing off grass. The cub took one crooked step, then another. He growled a small, embarrassed sound, the kind babies make when they're trying to be something bigger than their bones. He sniffed the bottle, sneezed hard, barred tiny teeth at nothing, then touched rubber with his lip and flinched like it had bitten him. He came back. Instinct, ancient and practical, found a familiar shape. He latched. Shock. Fast. The crying stopped. The first swallow was air. The second, water. The third audibly slid into a belly that had been all fire alarms. The change in the cub's body was instant. Shoulders dropping a half-inch, eyes blinking in the awkward rhythm of survival rebooting. The man didn't move except to breathe on purpose and stay. He let the cub decide what closeness meant. He cut a glance to the mother. Older female. Worn canines. Dark stain along the flank where weight had pressed hard. The grass was brushed the wrong way on one side. A chase written in bent stems. Nothing more to read. He swallowed the urge to name what had done it. Names don't help the living. The bottle collapsed in the cub's mouth. He made a tiny, furious noise at the betrayal and pawed the man's knuckles. Not to be held, but to insist the world continue giving. The man swapped bottles with motion so slow it barely existed. Salts and a little glucose now. Help for muscle that had loaned too much to panic. The cub drank like learning to breathe again. Up close, feelings had faces. The tiny kneading pause that pressed, release, pressed. The search look past the man toward the lioness every third swallow. The small, honest sigh that slipped out when the body felt water go where it needed to go. He knew better than to translate animals into people. He didn't need to. Grief and relief looked like what they always look like. Here, now, in fur and breath. He let the cub see his hands, then inched one hand forward and set it on the ground within reach. No touch, just permission. The cub shifted. A whisker brushed skin. Then a paw rested on his wrist for 2 seconds. A grip no heavier than a leaf. The man's throat worked once. He did not speak. Something had chosen him. He scanned the bowl again for the problem that always comes next. Hyenas hadn't arrived, but the heat-sour smell said the savannah had already made the calendar. He eyed a termite mound at the west edge crowned with thorn. Shade he could make better. He set a shallow pan, poured clean water, and wet a rag to lay along the cub's neck, where blood runs close to the skin. The cub tolerated it, eyes half closed, the way a child does when exhaustion is bigger than pride. He took 2 squares of tarp to the lioness and gave her a dignity the day had not. Head and flank covered, corners cinched so the wind wouldn't steal the last decent thing. He stood a fraction too long, then turned back to the living. The mesh shade went up, a triangle of mercy in a flat field. He guided the cub there, not with hands, but by standing where comfort was. The cub followed badly, wobbling, looking back at the tarp because love keeps checking even when it knows. Under the mesh, the flies thinned, the light cooled, and the cub's breath began to count itself instead of pleading with the sky. He radioed without drama. Juvenile lion, dehydrated, adult female deceased. No pride in view, requesting vet and transport. I'll hold. Static and a far voice. An hour, maybe more. He looked at the sun. An hour is a long time in heat like this. The cub finished the second bottle and let it fall with a sound that should not break a man, and did. He turned and pressed his forehead into the man's knee, the way the very young anchor themselves, to something that feels like not alone. The man let it happen. He set a palm lightly against the small ribs and felt them settle under his hand. Not tame, not owned, simply safe. Then the math changed. From the far thorn, a low, ugly chuckle rose and came on legs. 4 hyenas fanning out of shade, eyes flicking lioness, cub, man. The leader paused at 20 meters, shoulders hinged for the sprint, calculating the line between hunger and risk. The man stood into the space and drew a boundary, with nothing but posture. He did not shout. He set his boots where the hyena would have to decide no with its body, not just its mind. In his bag, the air horn waited. In his chest, his heart stayed slow, because a small body was pressed to his leg and could feel if he lied. The leader lifted its nose, caught the wet milk smell, and began to trot, not to the carcass, but to the cub. He brought the horn up halfway, eyes never leaving the hyenas, and stepped in front of the cub as the first set of paws broke into a faster gait. A second hyena cut right, trying to fork the cub. He slid that way too, low and wide, forcing them both to meet his chest before they met the small body pressed to his shin. The cub pressed harder, a trembling heat against bone. He could feel the heartbeat, not a rhythm yet, a scatter of Morse code. He pulsed the horn again. The lead hyena paused at 16 meters, eyeline measuring meat, risk, distance. It flicked a look at the covered lioness, meat that doesn't argue, then back at him. He took 2 slow steps toward the tarp and offered a lane that didn't cross the cub. Predators solve for least resistance. The lead hyena took the offer, circling to the dead. The others followed the math. One ear always canted his way. He didn't celebrate. He held the line while hunger did what hunger does at a body. The sound was the kind that teaches you to breathe carefully. The cub gave a thin bark, panic trying on anger, and tried to surge. He blocked with a knee, and breathed in counts so the small body could find him and copy. In, 2, out, 2. The cub's breathing caught and then followed. Clumsy, but real. Shade. Move him. Not by hands. By gravity. By making safety the path of least resistance. He slid sideways in a crescent, letting his body be a moving wall. The cub shadowed him, wobbling, eyes ricocheting between the tarp, love, and the hyenas, danger, and the man, relief. Under the mesh triangle he'd rigged, the light softened. He set the wet rag fresh along the neck where blood runs close to skin, fanning it once with his hand. The cub endured the indignity, jaw working around the taste of milk that still lingered. He checked hydration quick and clean, a pinch of skin over the shoulder. Slow to fall, but not hopeless. Gums tacky, tongue too dry. He tore a corner of gauze into strips and laid them in the pan to wick water. Some animals drink better from wet cloth than from bowls when their brain is still in siren light. The cub licked the strips, awkward at first, then with purpose, the way memory finds an old path. Over by the tarp, the hyenas worked. Not cruelty, not ceremony. Work. He kept his eyes for movement that meant the math had changed again. He keyed the radio with a thumb without moving his head. Holding. Juvenile taking fluids. Hyenas on carcass, not on cub. ETA? The reply snapped back through heat static. 50 minutes. In dry sun, 50 minutes is a different kind of animal. He looked at the arc of light and mapped its next steps. He'd need to move the shade with the day, keep the small body under the cool. The cub leaned, not to be picked up, to anchor. A paw slid onto his boot and stayed, claws barely pricking leather, a handshake as old as breath. He let it. He kept his free hand visible in the grass. Every contact would be asked for, not taken. He scanned the ring of thorn. Any pride shapes? Nothing. The wind was steady from the east. If anything else came, scent would say so before eyes could. A pair of vultures shifted lower, second-guessing their fear. The hyenas huffed them off without looking up. Flies nagged the cub's eyes. He tore a thin strip of gauze and damped it over the brow ridge, shading without covering vision. The cub tolerated, then pushed his face into the man's palm for 2 seconds, the closest thing to thank you the wild ever gives. He felt something in his ribs unclench and then clamp again because the maths of day didn't care about poetry. He slid the mesh 6 inches west to track shade. The cub followed the shadow's edge as if the ground itself were teaching him where safety lives. Small winds, stacked, shade, water, breath-finding rhythm. Out in the glare, the lead hyena raised its head and tested the air like a question had changed. He stood, horn low, and the hyena dropped its gaze back to meat and kept working. He watched the shoulder blades. If one pinned its ears and loaded its hips, he'd collapse the distance and make himself a problem again. He peered at the lioness's foreleg. The tendon had a clean pinch, the kind you get when a hoof finds you, or a bad angle turns the ground into a weapon. It didn't matter. The dead teach caution, the living need time. The cub dozed standing, then sank clumsily and nodded off with his chin on his paws, the way young things dream with their whole body. The purr came, broken, learning, buzzing against the cartilage of old injuries in the man's chest. He kept watch over the ugly honesty of hyenas at work and the small miracle under mesh, and in that strange braid of noises, the day found a balance it could stand on for a few minutes. He took the bottle nipple and let the cub mouth it empty, not for milk, for comfort. The jaw loosened. A sleep twitch caught the paw. The claws flexed and released, needing nothing, practicing a future he might get. The radio ticked. 40 minutes. He looked at the sun. 38, if heat cooperated. Then the air changed. It wasn't wind. Sound came first, that low moan lions use when calling close. Not roar, mother syllables that roll the chest and travel low. The cub's ears snapped forward. His whole body stilled, then quivered as if a tuning fork had been struck inside him. He stood, swaying, nose high, the rag sliding off his neck. Across the bowl, the hyenas froze mid-work, faces lifted, listening the way professionals listen when a boss enters a room. One backed a step, not from guilt, from math changing. The lead tested the air and huffed. A let's see no one needed translated. He did not move. Movement rights checks the body might have to cash. He placed his palm where the cub could find it without looking, and the paw found it, tiny weight settling just enough to remember trust. The call came again, closer. 2 voices now, braided, not hunting. The kind of sound that turns heads and moves milk. 2 lionesses crested the south rim, walking soft-wristed out of the heat, belly lines heavy with milk, and the cub stepped toward them, before the man could decide if this was salvation or another kind of ending. The second lioness flowed wider, a guarding arc, eyes moving through thorn and shade the way rain checks gutters, not a hunt pattern. Tail low, ears forward but soft, steps quiet without that stock-locked ankle cats use on living meat. She glanced once at the tarp-covered mound, head cocked the way cats balance 2 truths at once, what was and what is. He slid the mesh half a meter aside so it would not be a wall. He angled his body and opened a lane from cub to lionesses that did not pass through him. The hyenas read that too. The lead animal backed a step, not guilty, outgunned. One ear kept him in its triangle. The other tracked the new math. The first lioness came down the last rise with a tiny head tilt, jaw parted just enough to drink scent. Milk on herself, milk breath on him, bottle milk on the cub, and a thread of salt that belonged to grief. She stopped outside of reach and let scent finish the story before her eyes did. Flies buzzed lazy rings between them and nobody cared. The cub stepped. One wobble, then a straighter line, as if the ground had chosen a side. He walked past the man's knee without touching it, as if the world had shifted axis, and he had always been pointed this way. He gave a small, broken chirrup, not a roarling, not a scream, the kind of sound tiny mouths make when asking permission. The lioness answered with nothing, which is how lions say yes when yes is fragile. She sank a forepaw into the grass and held still to let scent move. He watched her whiskers set, Not forward in force, not backward in fear. Neutral, choosing. She lowered her head until her nose breathed over his face, and the cub blinked hard under it. A milk-gray flutter that said both I know and I don't. He kept his hands where they had been. Visible. Idle. He did not count the hyenas, but the back of his skull did. The lead had dropped into that off-duty slouch scavenger's use when kings are in the room. Two moved to the downwind side of the carcass to catch signals from the newcomers. The bowl held. The second lioness completed her arc and set herself 4 paces off the first, facing outward, the kind of quiet perimeter that turns open space into a nursery. Her presence walled the whole picture without moving a muscle. He felt his chest let go an inch it hadn't realized it had been holding. The cub reached the first lioness and tucked his face into the hair at her inner thigh, right where heat and milk write their alphabet. She did not step back. She did the flamen curl, upper lip lifted, air drawn over the Jacobson's organ, then let the lip fall in a way that reads, "This belongs to people who have learned to read it." She shifted her weight in a slow half-circle, not away from him but to make space, the kind of tiny geometry mothers do even when no one taught them anything. He felt the sting behind his eyes before he gave himself permission to name it. The brain listed protocols, distance, line of retreat, dart options, radio codes, and the body wrote a different list: pause needing air, breathing found and staying found, milk in both directions of the wind. He listened for the one wrong sign, ears flattening, pupils pinning, whiskers driving forward, that hard snap of tail that flips a permission into a correction. None of it came. What came was stillness, with all the decision already inside it. The first lioness lowered to a hip, not fully rolled, just enough to present a shelf. He had seen it 1,000 times in pictures and twice in life, and every time it has felt like a prayer answered in its own language. The second lioness didn't look at them. She watched the horizon, the way nurses watch doors. He could have wept just for that. The cub searched, nose left, nose right, a butt scoot closer, a headbutt that would one day be a shove. He failed once, mouth sliding on skin with no latch. He tried again. The lioness held still the way skyscrapers do, all quiet steel and small flecks. Her eyes went half closed in that slow blink that says, "We are not in danger right this second." He remembered the mesh, the shade shifting. He didn't move. Any movement would be an argument with a moment that did not want humans in it. He kept his breathing honest and let the heat do what heat does to the back of a man's neck when his body thinks he ought to kneel. Behind them, the hyenas committed to the dead. Jaws worked. Bones talked. A vulture slipped lower, found politics, and rose again. The sun pushed one finger deeper into the bowl, and every blade of grass decided which way to lean. The cub found purchase. You could see it more than hear it. The tiny jaw set, the throat work, the shoulders let go. One hind paw flexed and pressed against the earth like it was kneading the sky instead. The lioness exhaled through her nose, a sound like a small door closing gently in a long hallway. His vision went watery at the edges. He let it. Feeling is not a threat. It's a report. The radio ticked on his belt, 30 minutes, as if any clock mattered now. He didn't touch it. The second lioness flicked an ear at the sound and dismissed it the way professionals dismiss distractions. Not my problem. He checked the cub's belly by eyes only, rising a little, then a little more. The jaw still working with a baby's job, the breath flattening into a calmer count. His own body found the metronome again. In, out, with him, not for him. He thought it then, and didn't say it because the savannah does not like to be told what it just did. If he keeps this, he lives. Not fairy story certainty. Just math with a better variable finally slotting in. The first lioness shifted a centimeter to ease a cramp only she could feel. The cub readjusted without losing the work. The second lioness's whiskers twitched at something he couldn't see, and she stood, stepped 2 paces and sat again, back to them, a wall with eyes. His throat did that thing grief and relief do when they agree to share a house. He blinked hard and felt salt cut clean tracks down a face that had forgotten how much water a man could spare in noon heat. He let himself look at the covered mound one time. 3 small stones at the head, tarp corners cinched like dignity, and then back at the living decision happening inches away. The first lioness half rose, turned to lead, and the cub, milk drunk, unsteady, tried to follow, legs failing in a tangle. He stumbled toward the man's knee out of habit, then looked back to her, and in that blink, he had to choose whose gravity to belong to. He didn't help. Not with hands. He shrunk his shape, palms open, head a touch down, offering absence so the cub could choose the thing the world had just given back. The first lioness waited, perfectly still. No hurry, no prod. The way mothers hold doors without touching small backs. The second held the quiet perimeter, eyes on thorn and horizon, reading heat shimmer for edges that change into threat. The cub chose. He stepped off the man's knee and tottered to the lioness's foreleg, leaned his whole small weight against that pillar of living muscle, and breathed like someone who had finally found the room with air in it. She shifted a centimeter to make space, geometry of care, then began downwind at an easy, soft-wristed walk the cub could hold. He stood and backed away 3 paces, no drama, no heroics, making the lane wider. He reached for the radio without looking away, and pressed once, the silent code that meant, eyes on me, engines off. Up on the ridge, vehicles held like stones. A vet lowered her binoculars and wiped her face with the heel of a hand, as if dust had surprised her eyes. At the carcass, the hyenas read the room. They worked the dead, not guilt, not shame, but they gave the living wide circles, heads low, ears halfway. One tested a line that brushed the lioness's path, caught the flat look from the second female, and reconsidered life. He took the mesh shade down slowly and folded it to half, then a quarter, hands busy so his ribs could learn what his head already knew. He was not part of the next chapter. The cub glanced back once, a reflex, eyes milk gray still, then tripped forward to keep up. He would fall, and get up, and fall again, until legs and life matched. They reached the mound. The first lioness paused, scented the tarp and the 3 small stones, and did a single slow blink toward the man. The animal's yes that does not need applause. He returned it with the smallest tilt of head, a consent to leave the page. She stepped on. The second female fell in behind. The cub drifted to the wrong side, the open side, and the second shouldered him back so casually you might have missed it if you hadn't been counting every miracle as if it could run out. He laughed once, a sound with salt in it, and let it die in his throat so the bowl could keep its quiet. He moved along the outer arc, parallel at distance, long enough to be certain this wasn't a trick the day played. The cub's tail made small question marks when a tuft of grass surprised him. Once he needed air mid-step, memory and milk writing instructions on bones. At the foot of the slope, the first lioness stopped where shade begins and risk eases, looked back through him, past him, and he understood the order of things. We are done here. He nodded to no one, and stood out of the picture. He walked back to the mesh triangle's ghost and picked up the bottles and the rag, holy junk, and stowed them like glass. He pulled the tarp corners tighter on the lioness and set the stones better because grief likes to work with hands. The hyenas huffed at him without stopping, and he said, "I know," under his breath, not to be heard. Up on the ridge, a ranger whispered into his mic, "We stand down," and the vet said nothing, and then said, "We witness," which was the right verb. He stepped to the truck to log what the world will later pretend was data. He wrote only the pieces he didn't trust to memory. Time, wind, sunline, 2 lactating females, social grooming absent, guard posture present, cub latch at 12:42. Under intervention, he wrote none, by design. A shadow touched his boot. He looked down. The cub had veered, just once, off the line of lion, walked the 2 meters back with the wobble of someone learning his weight, and pressed his forehead into the leather for 2 seconds. Not a plea, a punctuation mark. The man did not bend. He laid a palm on the air above the small skull, and let feeling happen without stealing the moment. The cub turned on a hiccuping breath and telegraphed his whole future in a clumsy half-pounce to catch up. The lioness gave a soft chuff, barely air, more idea than sound, and he knew what it meant. Now, she led. The second closed. The cub threaded the space between them like a bead on a moving string. 3 bodies became one shape, and the bowl released them to the savannah the way water releases boats that have always belonged to it. He let the silence settle, and then did the last human job. Called it in. Copy adoption in field. 2 females, 1 juvenile added. No dart, no lift. We'll track from distance. He expected disbelief. What came was the hush of people choosing to believe, because their eyes had already told them. On the way out, he set the mesh and bottles in the bed and took the nipple in his hand. It was nothing. A cheap rubber thing that had met one need and become a relic. He turned it with his thumb and looked at the grease crescent his own skin had left on it. A print inside a day he would not get back and would never want to. They climbed to the ridge. The convoy idled quiet. A vet closed her notebook and said, "If you write this, no one will believe you." He smiled without showing teeth and said, "Then we won't write it. We'll just keep watching." Down in the bowl, the hyenas finished what the day had allowed and slid away. Bellies lowered, mouths shut. Work done. A vulture dropped in on ankles it hadn't used in hours and finally felt entitled. He took one last look at the lines on the ground. Small paws weaving in and out of larger prints. A braid no map could show. He turned the truck toward the service track, checked mirrors for dust, and froze. The radio cracked. A camera trap ping from the south draw, 1 kilometer ahead. The tech's voice came thin and astonished through heat shimmer. 2 adult females, 3 cubs crossing, 1 much smaller, kneading at the flank, then moving. You'll want to see this. He felt his throat tighten like someone had pulled a knot wrong, and it had turned into the right knot anyway. He rolled forward, heart already answering the picture he hadn't seen yet, while the camera sent one frame, then another, toward the screen that would either confirm a miracle or teach him a new way to break. The truck rolled slow along the service track, while the tech's voice tried to keep its own shape. The tablet in his lap woke 1 frame at a time, like a door easing open so as not to wake the house. First frame, brush parted by a shoulder and an ear with a nick that belongs to no one but the wild. Second, the 2 lionesses in profile, soft-wristed again, not hurried, moving with a reason that doesn't announce itself. Third, 3 cubs in the gap between them, 2 tall enough to clatter, 1 smaller, still milk gray at the eyes, pressing his face into the larger female's flank and kneading as if the earth might let down a curtain and make a room out of open air. He did not shout. The body's first instinct was to laugh, and the throat, loyal to grief, tried to cry. The compromise was a sound no language owns. He pulled over at the culvert where shade fakes its way into noon and let the tablet rest against the wheel. A 4th frame arrived, the smaller cub stumbling, then correcting, tail making a question mark. The larger female glancing down without slowing, as if a road could be a hand. 5th, the second lioness pausing at the camera, eyes at lens level, and then passing so close a whisker grazed plastic and left a line of dust like a signature. They drove to the camera, not fast. The track there wore the braid of prints he'd half believed he'd imagined on the ridge. 2 adult, 2 bold juvenile, 1 new. Small ovals placed between bigger steps, not hiding, belonging. He stood in the frame the camera had just used and watched the scene replay itself with the kind of certainty you only get when your feet and your eyes and the math of weight on soil all agree. He walked the distance a cub had walked and stopped where the kneading had happened and put his palm on the air where fur had been. He didn't need to touch anything to feel it. The convoy stayed quiet because professionals recognize cathedrals even when they're made of dust and thorn. The vet wrote, "Nurse sharing confirmed," with a line under confirmed that pressed deeper than the rest of the letters. A ranger took a photo of prints for the report nobody would read and then deleted it for the memory he couldn't afford to dull. The youngest tech cupped the camera trap like he'd just been handed a small bird that trusted his hands. They followed the crossing from a distance, not to steal anything, just to witness the part the story had earned. The path slid into broken shade and out again. Where the wind turned the grass, they saw the smaller cub's hesitations, tiny pauses at nothing, little practice steps that future hunts would refine. The second lioness leaning an ounce of shoulder to nudge him back into the seam of protection, a choreography older than any map. He built no speeches for the radio. He said what the day needed said. 2 lactating females, 3 cubs, 1 smaller adopted, moving south ridge to Long Pan. We are not intervening. On the other end, the base let silence be the answer first and then said, "Copy," in the voice people save for weddings and hospital rooms and rare weather. They looped wide to the water, arriving late on purpose. The pan chose to be generous, a slick of brown that shone like steel under a scraped sky. At the far lip, The two lionesses drank, heads up between sips the way good sentries do. The older cubs slapped at their own reflections and learned nothing except joy. The smaller cub approached with the care of a student who's memorized where the edge of a desk used to be and finds it was moved an inch. He put a paw in the water, surprised himself, and looked up with a face that asked the world to be patient. The larger female answered by doing nothing, a permission so complete it deserves a better word than permission. He could have stood there until the sun forgot itself and not moved. Instead, he backed away with the team and let a stand of sickle bush hide them. Through the green, they watched the small one press his face into a flank, knead once, then drink the way thirst instructs. When he tripped, he recovered by leaning into a shoulder that did not move. At the edge of hearing, a hyena coughed, and then thought better of the plan it hadn't fully formed. Vultures pivoted from curiosity to pointlessness, and rode a warmer column into colorless sky. A dragonfly sketched blue lines no one else would ever see. The man took the bottle nipple from his pocket and turned it in his fingers. The rubber had a tiny crescent where small teeth had practiced living. He did not keep trophies. He kept reminders. He set the nipple on the dashboard later with a note that said, "Milk took him," then crossed it out and wrote, "She did," because accuracy is a kind of love. They returned to the bowl long enough to do right by what remained. He set the stones more securely, smoothed the mound, and tied a small ribbon of survey tape low in the grass, not to mark for people, to remind himself there was a place he should go light. The hyenas had finished with the respect their kind grants. Thoroughness. The field was honest again. For 3 evenings the cameras gave them what faith requires, pictures that agree with hope. The smaller cub on a termite mount learning the only calculus that matters. Height equals safety equals breath you don't have to measure. The second lioness blocking with her body when a jackal tried confidence on for size. The larger female letting a head tuck under her rib line and not lifting her paw even when her leg went numb. On the 4th evening, nothing passed, which is also an answer the wild gives when it wants you to trust it. He wrote less than he could have. He wrote the kind of ledger the heart understands. Water, shade, body as boundary, weight. He logged wind, sunline, time to latch, time to rise. He did not log tears. They're not data, they are receipt. When he finally slept under a canvas roof that remembered the day with him, the noise that woke him wasn't crying. It was night doing its job, things walking where a man cannot, things living to be lived. He placed his palm over the center of his chest and felt the rhythm that had changed. Not faster, not slower, truer, like a drum someone else had set in the room and invited him to keep time with. If you have ever stood between danger and something small and felt the wild reach past you to fix it its own way, you know why his eyes burned and he let them. You know why a mesh triangle can feel like a chapel and a bottle nipple like a relic, and why 3 stones under an acacia can be a monument if you breathe right in front of them. Some stories end with a lift, a dart, a crate, a gate. This one ends with a cub choosing gravity and 2 mothers choosing him back. If this met you where you keep your quiet, stay with us. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs proof that animals feel and remember, and come back for the next wordless rescue, because out here, courage doesn't shout. It holds, waits, and lets go at exactly the right time.